Welcome to Production Value Matters, the business event podcast, brought to you by Byrne Production Services. Here, we explore the different ways business events can bring value to your organization, the latest technological advances in the event space, as well as providing you with actionable strategies to make a business event a success. Let's create an exceptional event experience.
Welcome to another episode of Production Value Matters, the business events podcast. Today, I'm joined by Corey Bruins, the Director of Programs and Events for California Conferences at e.Republic. He has over 10 years experience in event planning and operations for B2B, B2C, and trade shows. In his own words, he has a passion for creating transformational experiences that go beyond the typical and inspire attendees to give, buy, learn, and inhabit their own worlds in a meaningful way. Who better to talk to us about the human element and authenticity at B2B events? Welcome to the show, Corey. How are you today?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Great. So how did you get your start and get to where you are today? Can you take me a little bit through your career so far?
Yeah, so I guess everything started really quite a long time ago. In seventh grade, I had the privilege of attending a brand new middle school with a broadcast production studio. And that kind of sparked the creative and, production-y juices in my very young brain. Combine the opportunity that I had to dig into all of that tech with a very short youth theater career for about 5 years, spending some time on stage. And so I had the opportunity to really experience what it's like to be around a platform and to be around places where people are gathered through the lens of both the technical and the theatrical, the performative and the logistic, and kind of got addicted to creating experiences for people at a really young age. I spent a decent amount of time in my early career behind the computer, kind of done the full tour. So I've spent time behind the camera, both still and video, a lot of time in live AV, which I know is one of your big worlds. And then I spent some time in the marketing space, digital marketing, both that and experiential marketing. You mentioned trade shows. I did a stint with a trade show agency. And so kind of fast forward to today, and I've landed in a spot where I'm really grateful to be able to spend most of my time on the relational side and the programming side in my role at e.Republic. But I do still maintain an AV company on the side and a number of other entrepreneurial efforts, as well as my engagement in the community. So yeah, that's the short version of the story.
Yeah, I think I spoke to somebody a couple of years ago about there's only sort of two ways people get into this business. It's either through hotels and hospitality management or through theatrical production. So it's nice to know that there's another theater nerd out there.
Is that in your background as well?
Yeah. Theater school, grew up cutting my teeth on dance shows and opera before I came into the world of events. So
excellent.
Strange pathway.
Yeah.
So we're here to talk about authenticity as a human element of B2B events. Let's dive straight in on that. And if you can define that authenticity in that context, like what does it look like at an event?
Authenticity in the context of B2B events, I think, is really difficult, actually. And the reason why is because there are typically such high demands and pressures and KPIs and benchmarks and goals that drives us sometimes outside of our authentic selves and into a space where we're really just focused on meeting the mark. And so I think that's a huge challenge. As far as defining authenticity, I think that it's a double-edged sword. There's two sides to it. I'm sure more, but maybe at its simplest, for those of us who are helping to execute and plan the events, no matter what our role is, doing two things: showing up as our authentic selves and bringing who we are to the event planning process, to the event day, and also intentionally inviting others to do the same. So that at the end of the day, the space that we are holding with each other is as authentic as it can be. And I think, that does get a little meta as well, because there's, the old adage that the harder you try to be cool, the less cool you are. I think that sometimes that's true with authenticity too, right? Where if authenticity just becomes the new mark to meet, then we're missing the point there as well. So it's difficult. It can be hard to explain to folks. It's something I think that is definitely more of an art than a science. It's something that you feel. It's something that you get comfortable with over time, because it's vulnerable and can be awkward sometimes, and can sometimes feel like bringing your authentic self is going to mean that you're sacrificing another goal that you're supposed to meet. So, like many things in life, it's a tension to manage, not a problem to solve. I think it's a never-ending journey. It's something that we lean into in our careers over time. And I think, one way that we can achieve that is by doing everything we can for those of us who can kind of see events through the lens of authenticity, to bring our authentic selves, because that creates more space for other people to do the same.
Yeah, so that trying so hard to be authentic that it doesn't end up being authentic just reminds me of a Kids in the Hall skit about the guy who has the disease where he always sounds sarcastic, even if he's being genuine.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
And I can totally envision that the more you try to be authentic, instead of just letting yourself be authentic, the more you're going to sound like that guy who says, no, I really want to be your friend.
Yep.
So in your experience in B2B events, how have you seen the pursuit of authenticity impact the overall event experience for attendees? Can you share an example where prioritizing authenticity transformed that event's success?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the nature of authenticity is that it's impossible to measure, right? Because it's really in every single person's own experience of the space. An example that is coming to mind for me recently, 2 or 3 weeks ago, my company produces 70 or 80 events nationwide for government technology professionals, people in the public sector who are in the technical realm. And we have an event in Sacramento that's one of the biggest that the company produces. And there's, plenty of space there for things to go in the direction of inauthentic. It felt authentic, I think, because there was a ripple effect from me and our leadership team all the way down, up and down the interaction sphere. And that includes the way that we interact with vendors, the way that we interact with guests, the way that we interact with the staff at the venue. And I just think that ripples out, and you can feel it. You can feel it in the air. It's hard to describe, right? But the more comfortable you make people feel, the more comfortable you make people feel that they can make mistakes, that they can fail, that they can be whomever they want, that they can be wherever they want. That expectations are just really metered down to the human element, the more authentic it's going to feel, I think. I think that also, holds true when there are moments of conflict, or, not everyone is going to approach being in an event on attendee or staff with the same level of flexibility, right? And so when those moments of tension come up, I think that is also an opportunity to take those concepts and transform them into authentic moments by really just giving it a beat and letting the human element of that moment sit there, instead of jumping right in and maybe even immediately trying to solve the problem or getting defensive, whatever it may be. I think just having a calmness in general. And for those of us who have been in the event space for a long time, that's something you learn that you have to have, right? Is maintaining calm in the crazy. But also continuing to, invite the folks who are there, the guests, into that calm, even if they're being a little bit crazy, I think creates even more and more of that kind of ball of authenticity. Perception is huge, right? So the way that people feel about something, what attendees and staff and vendors are telling each other about how they're feeling about the event, I think is a snowball. Right. So even if it's not the reality that something is one way or another, if everybody's telling each other that that's the way that it is, then that's going to start to color people's experience. So I think that inviting, the leadership teams, the teams that are there really to set the vibe and bring the authenticity, to actively tell positive stories throughout the event, before the event, and after, can help people lean into the best parts of authenticity throughout that event. I think a fun example of that was our general contractor at this event I just produced in Sacramento. We had 144 exhibitors. And as I stopped by and asked her how the day was going, she said, in the past year, your vendors are the kindest vendors that I can remember. And I said, well, it seems like you're not just saying that. Like, it seems like you really mean it. And we all know how vendors can be sometimes. And she said, yeah, no, I really mean it. It's great. And that made me feel good because there are sponsors, and so they're representing us well to a vendor of ours here. And so I just went around for the next hour telling people that she said that because I'm kind of spreading the authenticity, that person's shared an authentic moment and said, look, they're just really nice. And sometimes the event space can feel like you can't have that level of humanity, right? That we're just there to show up and do our jobs. And so when people bring their authentic selves like that, I think spreading it. So I just went around the convention center to my team, even to some attendees that I know. I said, hey, I was just talking to so-and-so, and they said that our sponsor community are the nicest sponsors they've ever met. And when you spread that positivity, I think it invites other people to say, oh, I can be human here too, right? Because if the people who are leading this thing are being human, then so can I. And I think it starts to spread like wildfire like that. And again, the opposite is true as well. So you have to pay attention to, and when negativity spreads. And unfortunately, positivity is a lot more difficult to get to spread than negativity. So you have to be prepared to overcome that and do it in an authentic way, right? Not just spreading positivity for the sake of positivity, because that's not going to work and it's not going to stick, but really telling the great stories that are happening of connection and human moments throughout an event, I think is going to help kind of create even more space for authenticity.
So considering that approach, how do you balance the commercial objectives of B2B events with creating genuinely authentic experiences that resonate on that human level?
Man, I mean, that's an age-old question, right? So I think that the answer may sound trite, but I do really think that it's the answer, which is that if you put people first, the rest will follow. And, there are places where, depending on your role in a given event and the structure that is above and below you, there are varying levels of difficulty in executing such a posture. I am very fortunate in my role in the company that I spend most of my time working for, that our leadership structure above me up to the CEO is very supportive of keeping our audience at the center of our events and putting people first. And I'm empowered to make decisions that align with that objective. And what I'm also supported if at the end of the day, that's a decision that maybe impacts the bottom line negatively, if you're looking at it from a numbers perspective. Or there may be a ripple effect, right? Sometimes you're putting one person first and that causes you to put another person second. And then at the end of the day, that can become a very complicated situation. So depending on your role in the process, again, varying levels of ability to execute on that. It's much more difficult to do that when you don't have the support of the people who are spending the money to make the event happen, or the people whose metrics are being measured up or down the line on your decisions. But keeping that as an idea that's at the center, even if it's difficult to execute on sometimes, I think you really ultimately in the end are going to see the dividends pay off on the business objectives as long as you're keeping people first. In the event space, the people are the business, right? So if we lose sight of that and let the people become the product, a la social media, et cetera, it's not going to work. And maybe there are opportunities for short-term gains there, which can always feel exciting, but in the end, it's going to be a loss. And I think for folks that have been around the event space for a little while, we've probably seen the way that plays out on both sides. It's difficult if you've got a client, in putting maybe an AV hat on, a more of a vendor hat on alongside you. Maybe you have a similar experience where you see a client going down a path that is, from your perspective, clearly not aligned with putting people first. But in that role, maybe that's not your job, or maybe that's not your relationship with that client to be able to call that out. And sometimes we just have to go in and do the job, right? Which is hard. But I think that it's, there's always an opportunity to call people up and to call people back to putting people first. And because the concept of doing that is inherently true, it can never go wrong to to keep that at the center of your frame, even if you can't always execute on it.
So, you mentioned technology and government events, which, our sector is often criticized for being impersonal and a bit bureaucratic.
Yep.
So what strategies have you found most effective in injecting that authenticity and human connection into those kind of gatherings?
I have the privilege of kicking off the events that I produce as the first person walking onto the stage. And so there's space there to set the tone of that invitation, right? And the way that I do that is by beginning every event with telling a story. And I like to tell all sorts of kinds of stories. And I typically wait until the night before to come up with the story that I'm going to tell, which would freak a lot of folks out. But I have the gift of gab, and stage fear, stage fright is not something that's a huge problem for me personally. So I can wait until the last minute and see, is there a story that happened that morning? Sometimes that'll happen. I'll have a conversation an hour before I'm going to go on stage and open up the conference with someone that I'm like, no, this is it. This is the story I'm going to tell. And just walking up onto the stage, calling that person out, or, sometimes I'll even invite them up really quick for like a very short fireside chat. And just striking people right at the beginning with, hey, this is not a hello, good morning. My name is Corey. The breakfast is over there. The bathrooms are over there. Right? Because that's so uninspired. And, to your point, we have to overcome, especially with my audiences, at least in my role at e.Republic. I mean, the folks that I'm looking at out in the audience are people who are generally spending the majority of their time behind computers, building systems and software and applications for the people of the state of California. So we have some work to do in terms of getting them up and out and motivated and energized and kind of inhabiting their body. I've even done short breathing exercises, a little bit of mini chair and standing yoga of, hey, let's get into our space. And at least for me, not having all of that, what's going to happen when I first invite people at the beginning of the day scripted, kind of letting the room inform that and feel it out, I think helps, again, invite that authenticity in people and bring them present into the room and remind them, not because I'm telling them, hey, are you awake? Make noise. Right? But actually creating space where it's okay for them to be themselves and be a little bit silly and engage with their neighbor and all of those things.
So can you talk about how that challenge sort of scales when you to maintain that authenticity while scaling up an event series? Like what are the challenges in accommodating larger audiences and more diverse attendee profiles?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting because I feel like most challenges at scale are logistic challenges. And at least from my perspective, the tactics that I bring to the table and invite others to bring to the table around creating authenticity scale well, because they are, either ways that we can do that from the stage that are programmed in, and then we can impact the whole audience that way. Or they're more of kind of a viral grassroots, let's spread positivity and network throughout it. And that can spread through a group of any size on both the positive and the negative. So at the end of the day, at least from my perspective, most of the problems with scale are going to happen in the logistics space, right? And so that comes down to putting profit before people, in the example of, hey, you know what, we're not going to have a coffee and food station there, even though we know we should, because we're going to, save a couple of bucks. Okay, well, that's going to create some, dissatisfaction with your attendees, and people are going to be grumpy, and like maybe you need to add an extra bar to make sure that people can get their drink during happy hour, And so I think it's really logistic things like that, where not cutting corners, especially on the basics, the things like food and drinks and water and coffee, things that people need to stay present and going throughout the day, is going to be huge. And it's especially, again, it depends on the context, but in a role where, like in our world at e.Republic, we've got a department that handles all of our logistics that as the conference director, I have visibility into and can help them make decisions. But if I stayed out of it, then I would be all the way out of it. That team is incredible and excellent at creating great events on paper. Sometimes when things scale, I have to step in and help and say, we have to add this here. We have to do this here. We have to change this layout. It's not going to work like this, So I think that whoever is going to be responsible on site, whoever is the person with the vision for the way the space is going to be laid out, the way food service is going to run, all of that, needs to at least have visibility into the way that the space is going to be set. This also comes down into things like lighting, right? And, items in the AV world where, as you can imagine, a space, there is so much mood that is created by the type of music that's playing, the volume of the music that's playing, what type of lights are in the room, even the psychology of how the room is colored, the way that you invest or don't invest in branding, right? All of that creates the overall vibe of the space. And you can talk to folks who will see that from a logistic perspective. So I think that and it is certainly a logistic, but if you don't have someone with a total vision on your event team that can sense what the event is going to be like before being there as they're crafting all those different spaces, you need to find someone who can help you do that, because that is what's going to really help create the vibe and create a space where people can be authentic and have an enjoyable and impactful experience.
So how are you translating that into digital and hybrid event formats? Like, is there any innovative method that you've employed at e.Republic to preserve that human element and authentic engagement for participants?
Yeah. So I have been at e.Republic for just a little bit over a year now and missed that company's efforts on the hybrid side. But prior to that, have run a consultancy and still do for experience design outside of that. And I spent the better majority of COVID flying around the country creating hybrid and remote experiences for clients of all kinds. We tried everything from, isn't it called Gather Town, the little kind of like Minecraft-like experience where you move an avatar around a world and you walk into a conference, like a virtual conference room, and then it shows up on your screen. Tried that. Used all of the various tools that are available at our disposal to connect people digitally. I could get into the brass tacks of unique and interesting ways of doing that. Here's what at least I've learned is that in-person experiences are not going anywhere. And and they're more important now, I think, than ever. And I think that people are still, believe it or not, coming out of COVID still and reminding themselves what it's like to be with each other in, gathering spaces. I think it's huge. So it's a different discipline, right? I think that's the big idea, is that space is different kind of work. And I don't know if you can expect the same outcomes from even a hybrid event as you can from an in-person event. So, thinking through decisions like, just because the technology is available to us, should we do it? Just because I can offer a hybrid advisory board meeting for the folks who are going to plan my conference, there's going to be 25 people. If I offer hybrid because I can and because it's convenient and because I know more people are going to come, is that going to devalue or increase the value for the overall experience of the people that choose to attend in person, or the overall goal of the gathering or the meeting, right? And I've waffled back and forth on that over the past year. I've got a lot of folks who would prefer to have, our advisory board meetings that help plan these events virtual because it's convenient. So on the flip side of that, extending that invitation and making it clear, we are not offering a hybrid option. And that's not because we don't have the capability. It's because we're setting a value here. And if you do wind up going the hybrid route, all of the things that we've learned over COVID, I think that the biggest challenge is holding the mark of authenticity in a different space. And what I mean by that is, at least for me, in my opinion, a lot of the activities and tactics and ways that I see virtual event organizers engage those folks are trying too hard to be cool, and it's not working. That's my opinion. And so I think letting the platform really say, the limitations of this platform, we're going to embrace them. We're not going to pretend that we're having an in-person event while we're having a virtual event. I think that's my, it's a different platform. It's a different discipline. It's a different art. And it doesn't make it any better or worse necessarily. It's just, what tool are you using for the job, right? And when you're talking hybrid, looking at, again, depending on where you're at in the stack of folks that are planning an event, taking responsibility for the end experience for folks that maybe don't see through to the end goal. If somebody comes and says, hey, we've got this breakout, it's really important. Can we live stream it? Can we do a hybrid option? Can we? Yes, the technical ability to do that is absolutely there. Even if we brought in every single piece of gear that would make that experience for the virtual attendees perfectly positive, I do think that it's going to devalue the experience for the people that are here in the room. And what is our highest goal here? And so in those moments when it's hybrid, splitting the difference with folks and saying, what are we trying to achieve? What is your goal by creating a hybrid space? And that's not to say that there aren't fabulous hybrid spaces that can be created, but I think you need to start with hybrid first if you're going to do a hybrid space, and start from the very beginning and plan it as a hybrid environment, as opposed to taking something that's a classic live person environment and just trying to directly translate it to virtual. So those are, a handful of ideas on that.
Yeah. So when moving on to experiential marketing activations you've designed, how do you ensure those experiences also remain authentic to the brand's voice and values while also engaging a meaningful experience for the audience?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is difficult depending on what angle you're coming at it from. So if we're talking trade shows, right, I think I've got a good friend who is still in the trade show industry. I haven't been in that space for over a decade, but I do get to live vicariously through him, and hear, he would be a great person for you to interview, actually, hear experiences of what it's like to work with clients who, a lot of times those companies are coming in with budgets, and the folks that are making the decisions really are not professional experiential marketers. And, depending on your role, helping to guide them in a direction that really takes kind of a human-centered design approach and puts the mind of the attendee at the center of your experience, which means that maybe it's not going to look as cool as you want it to look, or, it's not going to be as flashy as you want it to be. But walking through that space, virtually as you're designing it, and even in your mind of like, what do I want the end user to experience while they're here? And starting there from a human-centered design standpoint, right? What is my end goal? What do I want them to feel? What do I want them to think? What do I want them telling their friends? What do I want them to do? And then as you're designing the space, every element should be run through that metric. Is this helping us achieve that goal? And doing that in a way that's not entirely designed by committee, but at least getting a handful of people's opinions on it as you're building those spaces out, I think is important. And getting to people outside of your colleagues and outside of the people who are working on that, going home to your partner or someone you're hanging out with and having dinner and saying, hey, I'm thinking about this. I'm building a booth. I'm building an experience. I'm building an activation. I'm hoping this is going to happen. This is how we're doing it. If you were to be there, how would you interact with it? And I think that doing that and really doing that intentionally gives you the opportunity to see through other people's eyes, and helps to create a space that ultimately, at the end of the day, even if doesn't look like it's going to meet your goals on paper, will actually meet the goal of inviting humans in to experience the space in a way that's going to leave them with positive remarks, right? I mean, if you're walking around the trade show with a buddy or a colleague or a coworker, at least for me, when we do that, everything is judgment. It's like, okay, what is that? What did that? Oh my God, they didn't take that cable down. Everybody's going to have different eyes, and then you're walking through and experiencing it and doing the thing, and you walk away. And the first thing you do when you walk away is say what your experience of the booth was, right? Say what your experience of the activation. That was fun. That was weird. That felt forced. The music was too loud. Whatever it might be, right? So do that work in advance, because for the folks who are designing it and creating it, it's so difficult because we're in it and we're just like soaked in that work, to lose track of what that experience could actually be like. And of course, it's so hard to tell until you're actually there. But there's ways to engage in that work in advance where you're putting the human at the center of it. And I think that that's going to breed authenticity.
I think you're reminding me of like, it's sometimes the worst to walk around any trade show or event with another event professional.
It is the worst.
Yeah, I back to our conversation about theater backgrounds. I ruined so many plays for my family because they would sit there going, "Oh my God, this is so amazing! I can't believe they did that." And I would scratch my chin and go, "Oh, I know how they did that. They did this and this." And I'm like, "Well, thanks for ruining the magic."
Yeah, ruining the Disney magic. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So as someone who's adept at leading creative ideation sessions, can you share a little bit about your process for fostering that authentic, innovative idea? Something that meets an event's objectives while also resonating deeply with attendees. Like, is there a secret sauce, or is there a particular process that you follow?
Yeah. So one ideology that I really love in a book that I wholeheartedly recommend is called The Six Thinking Hats. And talking about creative process, right? I think that especially in the event space, the thing that kills the creative process the most is when you're in the early stages of designing what an experience is going to be like, and you have your best no person in the creative room. And, so they're thinking through the lens of logistic, they're thinking through the lens of budget, they're thinking through the lens of what they imagine to be possible. And those people are very special and very important, actually. And I learned early on in my career, I had an assistant who was absolutely fabulous, and I valued her opinion and her ability to execute so much. But when it came into creative ideation sessions, it was just a vibe kill. And so I think it was shortly after I was still working with her where I read this book, The Six Thinking Hats, and the basic concept behind the book is that as a meeting leader, facilitator of spaces, and it's interesting because I'll even take this and apply it to conferences and invite people to do the same thing from the stage at an event, is asking people to put a specific hat on for the specific job. And one of the hats is a hat of creativity, of imagination, of ideation that does not live in the realm of what's impossible, but lives in the realm of what's possible. And so you invite everybody in that space to put that hat on right at the beginning and say, this is a dreamer's table. Nothing is off limits, because in the early days, and I'm sure you've experienced this, the way that an idea that sounds extravagant and costly and impossible can all of a sudden, even if it's not exactly that idea, but it can start a seed of ideation that moves in a direction of things that do wind up becoming possible. Really great ideas, where if we didn't leave space for that in the very early stages, the ideation sessions, and you've got your folks in there that are shutting it down saying, no, that's going to be this, that's going to be that, you would lose out on the creative juices that come from that. And I think there's something to be said too about inviting the early stage ideators and planners into a space of playful authenticity, which is cool because we don't often get to do that, right? And so as the person who's facilitating a meeting saying, look, you get to do something you probably don't get to do in the rest of your work. You get to come into this room and we are just going to dream. And our goal is, by the end of this conversation, is not to have a plan. Our goal is to have generated a ton of really crazy, awesome, and wonderful ideas. And so in that example that I was giving earlier with my assistant, I had a conversation with her and said, I still want you in these planning meetings because you have really fabulous ideas, but I'm not going to ask you to be someone you're not. So it's okay if you're quiet. If you have great ideas, I want to hear them. But it's okay if you're quiet in those meetings. And I promise after the meeting, we can go back to my office and you can tell me all the reasons why it's not going to work. But in the meeting, in the space where we're inviting that ideation and innovation, that particular line of thinking is not invited to that table. And it's but you need all of the thinking hats. That's the key, right? You need the analysis. You need all of them at different times in the process, starting really early on with the dreamer's hat on, the imaginative hat on. I think at the end of the day, you can whittle those ideas down into things that actually are possible. And you can also surprise people with your ability to execute things that they didn't think could be done. And I think that generates and breeds authenticity as well, because it wows people a little bit, even if it's just people on your team. And then, that viral spread, this just happened at our event in Sacramento because the scale of this event was new to most folks at e.Republic. And so we did some things that for you and I are probably pretty straightforward, but for the company are big and wild and crazy and impactful. And so, you do that, even just pushing the envelope a little bit, and then people are going to start talking about that, right? And so kind of going back to that viral authentic spread of like, how cool is this? Like, we've never had a wall graphic that size before. And I think that doing that and starting early in the process and allowing and inviting that in is really good. I also think, depending on the context, that having as many folks from as many different sides of the event planning process at that table as possible is another great idea. And enrolling your vendor community, et cetera, early on in the vision. That's huge, So when I'm talking to folks about catering, I don't want to just talk about the food that I want served. I want to talk about the experience that I want people to have. And it's interesting because it winds up opening doors for you. Outside of my work at e.Republic, I'm planning a conference that's going to be at an old convent in Seattle. It's a very interesting venue, and the experience is going to be fascinating. They have an on-site caterer that they typically work with. And early in the event planning process, it was, you need to use our on-site caterer. It's a requirement, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And as we went, I realized just coming back and saying, well, this isn't working because the menu is not what I want, is not transforming the person's idea on the other side. What's transforming it is me saying, listen, this is the experience that I want to create for our attendees. And it has nothing to do with what I think about your vendors or your space or your rules. I'm just inviting you to sit on this side of the table with me and say, how can you help me create this experience for our attendees? This is what I want them to think. This is what I want them to feel. This is what I want them to walk away saying. And that's only a positive for you because it reflects positively upon the space that they inhabited. So I think inviting people to sit with you on that side of the table and dream and ideate and innovate and imagine is a way that at the end of the day is going to create some pretty cool, authentic spaces.
Yeah, I really love that. And especially the idea of putting on like the different hats and responsibilities that, and as you said of your assistant, that like that hat is not welcome in this meeting, but it will be welcome later, but just not in this meeting.
Right.
And I think that's brilliant.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we're running out of time. But finally, I just want to ask you, for event planners who are striving to infuse their B2B events with a genuine sense of authenticity, what sort of advice or guiding principles would you offer based on your wealth of experience in this field? We always like to give a sort of practical step at the end of our episodes to say, for our listeners to go out and do.
So start with yourself, right? I just had a conversation with a colleague yesterday who is in a role similar to mine, and she wanted to brainstorm ways that she could be more engaging in kind of her opening session at the beginning of a conference. And I think that what she thought I was going to give was, tactical ideas for ways to create that engagement. And my response was, you should do what is most authentic for you when you walk up on that stage. And so, and that's not just for a presenter, that's for anyone that's bringing themselves to the event planning process, is start with yourself. How are you feeling about it? Right. And if you're feeling like you need to perform, if you're feeling like you're being burdened by deadlines and all of the things that are very real, right? That's what's hard. That's why it's attention to manage. Our deadlines are real. Our metrics are real. Our KPIs are real. Our goals are real. And meeting them is an important element of being an events professional. But you are in charge of the way that you approach that. And so if you're feeling frenzied, if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling all of these ways about it, that's going to continue to breed itself down the line, no matter where you're at in the event planning process. So my piece of advice is to continually check yourself. Where are you at? And how can you also, like, being totally like authentic and real all the time is also impossible. So my advice is not constantly check where you're at and always make sure that you're being perfectly authentic. It's just to have an awareness, what kind of energy am I bringing to this space and where is it coming from? And continually going back and checking that all the way through to the event day. And on event day, it's the hardest, but maintaining that calm, collected, present, upbeat posture, especially on event day, continually checking, how am I inhabiting this space and how do I want other people to feel? I think is the best advice I can give.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us today, Corey. It was really great to chat with you.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Matt.
Production Value Matters, the business event podcast, is brought to you by Byrne Production Services. To find out more about Byrne Production Services and how putting on events can drive value for your business, visit byrneproductionservices.com. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And on behalf of the team here at Production Value Matters, thank you so much for listening.